This was a video I actually never planned on making. Tumbling Tower DIYs have been done to death, but recently a viewer has challenged me to put my own twist on the Tumbling Tower block DIY. This is going to be extra challenging for two reasons. One, there are a ton of Tumbling Tower DIYs out there. It's going to be hard to come up with something no one's seen before. Two, I haven't watched a DIY video in a very long time, so I don't actually know what's out there. So I don't even know if what I came up with is original. You're going to have to be the judge.
For this first DIY, you're going to need 2 bamboo cutting boards. I got mine from Dollarama, but I did a quick search and you can find similar ones in other places such as IKEA or Amazon. These are everywhere now, so you should be able to do this DIY even if you don't have access to the Dollarama. I laid out the Jenga blocks to figure out how tall and long I wanted this to be, and then I grabbed myself 2 pieces of wood with a straight edge and some wax paper and a couple of clamps. To keep the tumbling tower blocks from gluing to your straight edge piece, just slip another piece of wax paper in between the two. Apply a bit of wood glue to the ends of each of the tumbling tower pieces and then line those up so that they're the length that you're going to want that crate to be. From this point on, we're going to put the wood glue on the bottom and one side of each of the tumbling tower blocks so that we can adhere it to the first row and the next block. We're also going to stagger our tumbling tower blocks like I show you here. We do this because this is going to give it much needed strength. Now, none of Dollar Tree's tumbling tower blocks are straight edged, so I found it helpful to glue them together and then take my 2 straight edge pieces and push the tumbling tower rows together on both the ends and the sides. This way, it'll make sure that you get everything kind of nicely and tight together without any major gaps. And you're just going to keep repeating these steps until you get them as high as you want. I went 12 tumbling tower blocks high. A bit of that wood glue is gonna squelch on through, so don't worry about that. Just grab yourself a slightly damp cloth and just wipe away any of that extra glue. To get everything to stay straight and adhere properly, I went in with a couple of large clamps and those 2 straight edge pieces and clamped it all together, letting it dry. Then when that had set, I removed it from the wax paper. And then I headed on out to the garage to have me some fun. Using the miter saw, I cut down the 2 ends of each of the side pieces. Having never cut bamboo before, hubby got a little bit nervous and decided he wanted to try cutting it before I did. He's so protective of me. But when those rounded ends trimmed off like butter, I pushed hubby aside and took over. Each of the cutting boards need to be trimmed down to size, and I made sure to set those leftover end pieces aside because those are going to come up again in the next DIY. The last piece we're going to need is the bottom of the crate, so I just measured this out and cut this out from a piece of old plywood. For the handle, I used a bamboo broom handle and just cut that down to size. Now the top of the broom handle came with a rounded end, so just use a sander to round off the cut end so that they match. Now that I had all my parts ready to put together, it's time to apply a little bit of antiquing wax. Now this step is totally optional. You could of course paint your crate or leave it au naturel, and really either of these choices would have worked well in my decor, but I think that adding a touch of this dark stain is just going to provide a richness to this crate that I think is just really going to work. Once the antiquing wax had dried on all of the pieces, it's time to assemble it with a bit more of that wood glue. When we cut and measured the pieces, we cut and measured it so that it would cover the bottom. So add your wood glue to that bottom piece, starting with the ends and then attaching the sides, placing the wood glue along the bottom and the edges so that that all fits together nicely. And again, you can't see that bottom piece. Clamping that all together, the broom handle fit perfectly inside the holes of the cutting boards, so I just slid those through and left it as is. And then you're just going to want to let everything set overnight. There you have it, our first tumbling tower DIY. And if you like what you've seen so far, make sure you like and subscribe. We're gonna keep things easy this time and avoid those power tools. To start, all you're going to need is some white tissue paper, and you're going to cut that down so that you can tape it to the front of a plain piece of printer paper. Make sure that you have it shiny side down and that it's taped down completely so that it lies flat. Now you can pick any image to create this. I just picked one off of Canva, downloaded that, and printed it out onto my tissue paper. Now if you're using a laser printer, you can just go right on to the next step. But if you're using an inkjet printer like I am, you're going to want to let this sit overnight so that the ink completely dries. Use a bit of that wood glue and attach two of the tumbling blocks together, and then you're going to hold that so that it sets, and you're going to do this 3 times. Then you're going to use the wood glue to glue those 3 sets of 2 together, giving yourself a long piece of wood. Once that has set, go in with a bit of Mod Podge, and you're going to give the whole thing a thin coat. Then apply your tissue paper to the Mod Podge and then lightly press everything down with your fingers, working out any of those wrinkles. And then just let that set until it's completely dry. I don't do a great job of showing you this step, but basically what I want you to do is grab yourself some sandpaper and lightly rub it in one direction to cut off that tissue paper. And then I also used it to just sort of scuff up those edges. Then I went in with a bit more of that Mod Podge and applied it over top of the tissue paper and then let that set. I also did a lousy job of showing you I did both sides of this block, so make sure you do that as well. Dollar Tree has these wooden beads with a tassel at the end, and instead of redoing what's already been done perfectly, I just used this, cut off the end with the scissors, and it just stays together. Now you could totally just go with the beads that come with the string from Dollar Tree, but I had some dark brown square beads that I thought would just add a touch of interest to this finished look. So I slid off all the wooden beads and then did a pattern of the 2 beads from the Dollar Tree and then one of the darker square beads and then 2 of the wooden beads from Dollar Tree, and so on and so forth until I got to the very end. Now, in my humble opinion, details matter, and this eye hook was silver, so I popped outside and quickly spray painted that gold, and then I went in with some Art Minds chalk paint in gold and painted the sides and the top of the blocks so that it would match the eye hook and also just kind of fit in with the overall feel of the motif. Next, screw in a little screw to begin with, and then I took that out and then twisted in the eye hook because it was really hard to kind of get it to penetrate through that tumbling tower wood. Lastly, you want to tie your wooden beads to your wooden blocks, and there you have it. I don't know why, but this just makes me think of fairies and fairy tale books and just absolutely nostalgic feeling. But tell me what you think in the comments below. For this next DIY, we're going to glue those tumbling tower blocks together again in that staggered formation, this time only going about 6 tumbling tower blocks high. And again, do this on a piece of wax paper. Use that wax paper along your straight edge so it doesn't stick together. Wipe away any of that glue and clamp those tumbling blocks together. When that had set overnight, I headed on out to the garage, and again, using my miter saw, just trimmed both ends down. Now I'm making another box, so I'm going to need a bottom. So using that old plywood, I just measured that out as well and then trimmed that down so it would fit to size. Then using the bottom as a template, I figured out exactly how long I needed my sides to be, marked that off with a pencil, and then brought that over to the miter saw and trimmed that down too. Now remember those bottom pieces from the cutting board? We're using those again, and I just needed to trim them down so that they were the right size. I found this beautifully ornate gold box at the thrift store for $4, and I'm not quite sure what it was originally used for. It actually might have been for a Kleenex box, which is funny because that's what I'm going to use it for again, but it's too shallow for the Kirkland brand that I buy. So first I'm going to remove the base from this box blocks because we're not going to need that. And then using a pair of wire clippers, I just worked the little bottom feet off. Working them baby feet off left a couple little marks at the bottom, so I just went in with a little bit of Art Minds chalk paint in gold and touched that up. And now it was time to assemble the pieces. To do this, run a bead of that wood glue along the ends of your bottom piece and then add your end pieces. Then running a bit more of that wood glue along your Jenga block ends on both sides and then along the front bottom part so that you stick this to both the end pieces and the bottom piece so that you can't see that bottom piece because she's just not pretty. She's just not pretty. Repeat this on the other side and then using a couple of clamps, clamp that all together so that it remains in place until it completely sets. I left mine on overnight. The following day, remove your clamps, pop in that Kleenex box, put on the top, and there you have it. A very stylish way to wipe one's nose. For this DIY, we're going to do the same thing we did for the beaded block DIY, only this time you're going to make them in any shape or size that you want. And we're again going in with the same tissue paper technique, using some tape to tape that down flatly to a plain piece of printer paper. And then just like we did before, we're going to print that out on our printer, and if you have an inkjet printer, you're going to want to let this rest overnight. Now I did 3 different pattern looks here, and I got each of them off of Canva and just simply downloaded them. And again, we're going in with that Mod Podge and just laying down a flat coat of it on top of our wooden blocks, and then applying the tissue paper ever so gently, and then just pressing out any of the creases with your fingers. Now I do a much better job of showing you what I meant when I was doing the wooden beaded DIY. Using a nail file or a piece of sandpaper, just lightly scrape those in one direction so that the tissue paper comes off nice and sharply at the edges. I'm not sure I made this clear the first time either when we did the wood beads, so I'm going to make it clear this time. Apply the Mod Podge on top of your tissue paper block and then let that dry. Once that's dried, then go in with your sandpaper or nail file again and just lightly scuff up the edges, giving it this worn look and almost making the tissue paper look like it's been painted onto the wood blocks. And here you go, the finished look. It's a simple DIY, but you could use these in so many decorative ways against other pictures, on trays, you name it, there's a place for it. For this DIY, we're starting again with gluing a long row of those tumbling tower blocks together, and then we're going to form that staggered pattern that we did for the crate and for the Kleenex box. Now you can make this as large as you like. I went with 19 tumbling blocks high. Then I headed out to the garage to play with my favorite tool and using the miter saw cut down each of the edges, giving myself a nice clean line. I decided that I wanted to paint the background with some of Art Minds antiquing wax to give it a dark stain. However, you could actually do this DIY in reverse. You're gonna see what I mean in a minute. I headed back onto Canva and found this image of 4 men in a canoe. And when I bought my Cricut machine, it came with this ugly piece of brown temporary vinyl. And so we're gonna use that to create a stencil with the image that we just got from Canva. And you're just gonna simply place your stencil down onto your board wherever you feel that it looks best, and then burnish that down. Remove your transfer tape, and then to prevent any of the paint from bleeding underneath our stencil, you're just going to go in with a little bit of Mod Podge and a small paintbrush and just lightly apply that Mod Podge just to the edges of your stencil. Then using some white chalk paint and a dry stenciling brush, you're just going to pounce that paint on, not going for perfection here, just going for getting that shape in. You're not going for full coverage. Carefully remove your stencil. And now this looked a little too plain to me, and I tried different things like seeing what a 3D frame would look like or a frame using the Tumbling Tower blocks, but in the end I decided to go in with this rope. To prevent the edges from fraying, you're going to go in with a little bit of your hot glue and just squirt that onto the top, and then grab yourself one of your hot glue finger protectors and just work that into the top of the rope. And then once that's cooled kind of hot, then you can use your fingers to work it in. Working a little bit at a time, add that hot glue and then the bit of the rope along the entire edge of your picture, working from the top end because that's where you're least likely going to see the cut ends of the rope. If you're wanting the option to hang this, make sure you add a sawtooth picture hanger to the back. And here's the finished look. Tell me, would you have done this white in the background and then the image dark, or dark like I've done it and then the image white? We're going in again with that same staggered pattern. Only this time we're going to do it in sets of 3s, and we're going to make 3 of those sets of 3s longer and then 2 sets shorter. I hope that makes sense. And then using some sandpaper, just lightly sand down any of the glue that might be lying on top. Next, go in with a little bit of antiquing wax. I'm just using the one from Art Minds, and apply this on the first large piece to the front and one of the sides and the bottom and tops. You're going to want to go for a different coverage look for each of these trio packs. So on one, I went quite thickly with the antiquing wax. On another, I used a bit of a lighter touch and then wiped that down. And on a third, I even sprayed it with some water and then wiped that down, and it created this really interesting effect. Once those had been set aside and dry, it was time to use some more of that wood glue to glue each of the pieces together and then clamp everything into place. While that sets, you're going to go in again with a bit more of that wood glue and glue 3 of those Tumbling Tower blocks together in a row. And you're going to do this 3 times. So you want 3 sets of 3. Those trios set up, you're going to go back in and do another one of those staggered formations, this time making it 8 blocks high. Once everything has had a chance to set up, you're going to go in with some antiquing wax, and just like you did with the other pieces, you're going to paint that on and then just remove a little bit of it, going for a different look on each of the pieces. Now we're going to be using those 3 trio pieces we put together as a ledge, but they're a bit too long, so just mark that off with a pencil and then cut it down with your miter box. And then glue the longer trio on the front and then the 2 shorter ones on the sides with some wood glue. And then once you've clamped that together, let it set. I realized here we should be actually making a 4th trio, so I put together this 4th trio, and then while the larger piece was setting, I clamped these together with little Dollar Tree clamps and let that set as well. And then when that was done, I just painted it with the antiquing wax. And then this is the point where I realized that I forgot to paint the underbelly of the shelf, so make sure you do that as well. Then using a generous amount of wood glue, attach that trio we just made to your larger piece. You want to place this in the center of your larger piece, and you want to place it where you want your shelf to go. Next, you're going to put wood glue along the top of that trio, and then on any of the places of your shelf where it's either going to meet the larger piece or it's going to meet that trio. And you're going to go in with a generous amount of glue because that's all that's going to be holding this shelf in place. Wipe away any of the excess wood glue, clamp the shelf and the trio together, and then leave it overnight to set. And then once it's had a chance to set, just remove those clamps and then add picture hanging hardware to the back. Now, I wouldn't put anything too heavy on this shelf, but you certainly could put something light on it.
If you enjoyed those, make sure you subscribe. Give me a thumbs up. If you hit that notification bell, it'll let you know the next time I upload. Oh, and you might enjoy these.